Here is our next artwork of Constantine. And you saw this when I was introducing Constantine to you. This is an official portrait of Constantine. It's a fragment of a portrait. You can see here in the title, Portrait of Constantine, and then in parentheses, Colossus of Constantine. You already know that word. Colossus means giant. This is a fragment of a gigantic statue of Constantine. To give you a sense of scale, these are what remain of the Colossus of Constantine. So we have his head, and that is the crook of his right arm. That's a hand. That's a knee. This thing was massive. The head itself, where's my notes? The head itself is 8 feet 6 inches tall. So a colossus, yes. The fragments that are here are done in marble, but we're pretty sure that the entire piece was made up of varied materials, maybe a brick core and then a wood torso with armatures that would have attached the marble pieces, and maybe these marble pieces were the exposed pieces. This type of massive colossus imagery, we've seen it in the past. We've seen it in the pharaohs of Egypt. We didn't see it too much in the Greek world in terms of civilians or even leaders, but we did see it in the large statuary of the gods. And here, this Colossus of Constantine is making a claim like a divinity, like a pharaoh, like a god. These fragments, which, by the way, there are several colossi of Constantine around the empire. We're looking at the one that was for a specific site, which is our artwork. So these fragments would have been assembled into what we think was a seated or enthroned Constantine, and they were placed in the Basilica Nova. Basilica, remember, you already know that word. Basilica is a rectangular shaped structure with 2 half-circle apses. It's a place of conducting business. So these fragments, we believe, were housed in the apse of the Basilica Nova. Here it is. And here in this computer rendering, we have understanding of how those fragments may have been assembled in a enthroned or seated Constantine, and he would have been placed in this apse, this small half circle, and then here is our basilica, right, a rectangular structure. This computer rendering is giving us the details that have been lost in the ruins. Here are the ruins of the Basilica Nova as they stand today. The name Basilica Nova. Nova means new, but it also had a second name, the Basilica of Maxentius. Now, Maxentius is the guy Constantine overthrew. So, of course, he's not going to want to continue to call the Basilica Maxentius. And he changes the name to the New Basilica, or Constantine's New Basilica. You get it? So here we are looking at the ruins of it. And then the basilica is located within the heart of Rome. Here's a map that we looked at before with the Forum of Trajan. And so just down the road is the Basilica Nova. And you can even see in this map how it is labeled the Basilica of Maxentius. In the larger kind of pull back even farther view of it all, here it is. So there's our Forum of Trajan. There are the markets of Trajan. Here's the Basilica Nova. Here's the Flavian Amphitheater. And then in blue, I've highlighted the 2 arches that we looked at. This is the Arch of Titus, and this is the Arch of Constantine. There we go. So he's set himself up as a colossus in this massive basilica, in this massive complex of historic Rome. And when I say gigantic, I mean that the space within it is also extremely large. So in terms of scale, it might not look like a lot in comparison to all of these other buildings. The Basilica Oppia, about the same size as the Basilica Nova, but the massiveness is on the inside. What do I mean? It's the vaulting of the space. It has a concrete core lined in bricks, and here we are looking at the side aisles. Rather than rows and rows of columns that create those side aisles, we see these gigantic open barrel vaults. And they still allow for movement in the aisles, but they also don't clutter up the space with lots of columns. The interior that is missing was also an extremely large barrel vault. So it would have been almost cavernous in comparison to those densely packed columns of traditional basilicas. Like what we saw in the Pantheon, we have these coffers that would have been brightly decorated, most likely with rosettes and bright, colorful mosaic tiles. There we go. So this diagram here is showing you the groin vaults that held up the nave, and then the barrel vaults that make up the side aisles. And then the apse is where the Colossus of Constantine would have been placed. Another interesting thing about this space, not only does it lack those rows and rows of columns, instead using the more efficient groin vaults, but also the original entrance to the structure was on the long side, which we know that's how you enter in a basilica, is on the long side of the rectangle. And the apse, a singular apse, was located on the opposite end of the main entrance. And this main entrance faced here, towards the Temple of Venus. However, when Constantine took power, he changed it up. He moved the entrance from this side to the short end of the basilica so that it could face the sacred street, or it was called the Via Sacra. And this then aligned with the Via Sacra, and he placed a new apse at the end of this new main entrance, and he placed himself in the apse of that new main entrance. So it's as if the emperor enthroned is present in this space, looking out onto the Via Sacra, the sacred way. He's symbolically aligning himself with the sacred city of Rome. Powerful, right? Yeah. Not only did it feature groin vaults for its roofline, but it had these clear story of windows that was along the top and the middle and the bottom rows. And the reason for this is because of the strength of the barrel vaults and the groin vaults. Because all of the weight is distributed to these main points, the stress is relieved from the walls, and the walls can then be pierced with windows, and the light can stream in. Here's another computer rendering. Now, like I said, the fragments that remain of the Colossus Our historians are unsure exactly how they were placed, but there must have been some kind of a brick core and then a wooden armature system, and then those exposed elements of skin were the marble, and perhaps a bronze drapery to create the toga would have covered parts of his body as well. So this is another artist rendering, another idea of how the Colossus would have been arranged. But I think it does help us in understanding how this massive figure is almost like presiding over the doings of this basilica. Even when the emperor isn't here, he is ever present. And then let's look in at the specific portrait of him. Oh, look at that. That's a nice drawing. Core of concrete and then lined in decorative stonework. Okay. Let's look at this as an official portrait of an emperor. Yes, it's part of a larger piece, but it also can be seen as a portrait of our emperor. So what do we see? In comparison to the past, what do we see? How is it in terms of accuracy? No, it's not very accurate, is it? I mean, it's a good representation of the figure. He's got that fantastic cleft in his chin, right? He's got that dimple right there. And he's got these beautiful cheekbones, the strong jawline, but it's not true to the actual proportions of the body, like what we see in Augustus or in Hadrian. Does he present himself as a philosopher? No, he doesn't. We're back to clean-shaven soldier. What about his age? He's younger than Hadrian. What we see is kind of a callback to Augustus, but with abstraction, with exaggeration of elements. This callback to Augustus makes sense because Constantine has now proclaimed himself sole emperor and no longer a tetrarchy, just like Augustus proclaimed himself sole emperor, no longer a republic. He presents himself as young, a new fresh start, and young, new fresh start. Clean-shaven soldier, clean-shaven soldier. But the abstractions here, the abstractions of his face are meant to emphasize what elements? Straight up those eyes. Those eyes are massive, so piety. Okay. It said that in his inscription of the Arch of Constantine, the pious one. So those open, receiving eyes. What else? Look at the thickness of his neck. There's this extreme masculinity to his face. He's lean, mean, fighting machine. So we have the kind of brute force of the past, like Caracalla, or those big, heavy bodybuilders of the general emperors. But it's now placed in this hyper-masculinized structure of his face. One of the reasons why historians look to this portrait of Constantine and those pious eyes is because he did something that at the time was unimaginable. What did he do? He converted to an illegal faith. He converted to the Christian faith. we haven't been talking about the Christian faith in this class just yet. We will. We're going to do that kind of rewind and restart shortly. But I introduce it now here with Constantine because in Constantine, many historians of the past have seen these open and pious eyes as not looking to the gods, but to the God, the Christian God. The reason that the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius was intact, survived, let me just pull him up again, hold on, is the reason that the statue, a bronze piece, survived is because for many hundreds and hundreds of years, it was misidentified as a portrait of Constantine. And therefore, when the fall of the empire and when it was made illegal to worship these emperors as gods, this statue was saved because it was seen as a portrait of the first Christian emperor. It wasn't, it's Marcus Aurelius, but that's the reason why it still survives to this day. So historians in the past would look at this portrait of Constantine and attribute the large pious eyes to his connection with the Christian faith and him being open and receptive to the power and strength and vision of a Christian future, a Christian God. We will talk more about this Christian faith in coming weeks, but I want to close out our discussion of Rome with a very dramatic change. In the year 330, Constantine, who had united the Tetrarchy, moved all of the capitals to one singular spot. He moved everything to an old Greek city called Byzantium. And he changed the name of the city to Constantinople. Now I've underlined here Constantine. Constantinople, opal comes from the Greek word opolis or city, and Constantine is him. He moves the capital and he names his empire, or he names his capital after himself, Constantinople. Let's zoom in. So Rome is over here. He takes away all of those other capitals, and he establishes himself not in Nicomedia, but in Byzantium. Now, if you remember, if you were paying attention when we were talking about ancient Greek art, I kept on bringing up Byzantium, and I said, keep in mind, it's going to come up again. Byzantium is an old Greek port town. It's not big, it's not small, it's not grand, but Constantine establishes his new capital there, and he renames the city Constantinople, the city of Constantine. I know, right? He then divides this empire, or when he dies, he sets up his two eldest sons with an east and the west, and they establish themselves as a Christian Roman Empire. Because under the rule of Constantine, he made the Christian faith, which had been illegal, a legal or viable faith. And his sons then established themselves as emperors and Christian. And so they refer to this new empire as the Christian Roman Empire. However, that's a mouthful to say sometimes. And so historians have changed or nicknamed this empire the Byzantine Empire. Why Byzantine? It comes from Byzantium. Hello, Byzantium. So the city Byzantium, now Constantinople, gets or gives us this shorthand name, the Byzantine Empire. It's easier than saying the Constantinople Empire, and it's easier than saying the Western and Eastern Christian Roman Empire. Whew. So I'm using this term from now on to define this area, this period style, and I don't want you to get confused about what Byzantium means. It's that ancient Greek city that was then turned into Constantine's capital, named Constantinople, but historians have used the shorthand of the Byzantine to describe this new established empire. Technically, he still sees himself as a Roman emperor. And the people, the citizens, they still see themselves as Romans, but they are now living in a new Christian Roman empire. An empire where a new faith is not only made legal, but the rulers practice this faith. That is a huge deal. Because remember, for so many years, for so many centuries, it's been a connection. Happy gods, happy people. The emperor has been this mediator. And now the emperor is speaking to a different God. This is going to cause an identity crisis, a religious crisis, a national crisis, and for historians, we see this as the eventual downfall or crumbling of the empire. Like I said, there's a lot more about the fall of the empire, but the lack of control within the state then leaves it vulnerable to invasion. I like this map here because it shows you all of the chaos that is going to happen in the 4th century, in the 300s, after Constantine moves the capital to Byzantium, Constantinople. We'll look more closely at this chaos in the next few weeks. But one question that students ask me is, why did he set it up over here? Why didn't he go back to Trier? Why didn't he establish himself in Rome? You know the answer. East is where the money's at. The trade, the wealth, the grandeur, the large cities is all in the East, not in the West. So the money is in the East, the capital moves to the East. And this leaves the West extremely vulnerable, not only in lack of communication and support from the emperor who's stationed in the East, but it also leaves them vulnerable for invasion. And thus, the end of the Roman Empire. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bye.